And I hope you all enjoyed today's session on contemporary leadership in a complex world. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our featured presenter today. He is executive leadership coach and professional development consultant, Mr. Brian Ackles. Brian, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kelly. As always, it's a real pleasure to be here, and this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is leadership, and particularly as we are moving into or are in actually a very complex world right now when it comes to business and leadership. So, a couple of objectives we're going to try and get through in the next 45, 50 minutes or so, and it's really looking at beginning the journey towards what 21st century leadership really has to be, and building an appreciation for the complexities and challenges that you face both as organizations and as leaders within those organizations. So what is contemporary leadership? We're facing a world of an internet of things. Everything is connected. We have very flexible working relationships. We have people that work remotely, people that work from home, very dynamic teams. Knowledge and the growth of knowledge is just massive. We have access to information, real or otherwise, at our fingertips. We have very short life cycles for technology, of course, and organizations now are a much shorter duration for their lifespans. A lot of startups, they start up, they go for a few years, they may get swallowed up, they may go by the wayside. So a lot of dynamics, a lot of changes, and a lot of challenges for companies, for organizations, and for leaders. So there's a real need for a new type of leadership. I mean, gone are the days when you work for a company and where you start after you finish your schooling and you go into the company and you start on the ground floor and you work your way up and you spend 35, 40 years and you retire with a gold watch. Those companies still exist, but they're getting much fewer. So this new type of leadership is about values and priorities. Creating vision and creating drive and creating purpose within their organizations and teams. And looking at this flux and transformation that we're into, leadership and the new type of leadership needs to be able to set direction in this sort of constantly changing, chaotic time, if you will. Direction changes all the time. So we look at leadership styles now that are very authentic, that are very agile, and are capable of working across this very diverse and very chaotic environment that we're in. As we look at global trade barriers coming down, economic borders are disappearing to a large extent. We have organizations that span the globe. That's more common than not now. So leaders now need to look at serving the interests of everyone within their organization, but not just within their organization, so that you've got your staff, of course, you've got customers, major stakeholders, but it's also about looking at the interests of the greater environment that the organization works in, the community, the country, the region, what have you. And it's important to get to know more and more about each individual that works for you. We're going to talk a little bit later about the multi-generational aspect of the new world. And it requires a different focus when you're trying to learn about people from 4 or 5 different generations. We're looking at how do we encourage collaboration across cultures, across time zones, across age groups, and how do we build personal connections, and how do we create this environment where we can understand, listen, and communicate a very wide range of concerns that is coming from people and from the organizations that are now spread out in such a wide and chaotic fashion. The challenge is we're rebuilding confidence as well. A lot of organizations spent, for various reasons, which we won't go into, a lot of energy working to build their business, but without really considering the larger community that they were working within. So a lot of issues around waste, around energy consumption, about pollution effects, as I said, damage to air, water, land. And this whole area of abuse, if you will, or what is seen as abuse in this century, has damaged the public trust in what in organizations. You know, if we think about disasters on the west coast of North America, like the Exxon Valdez tanker that hit and leaked a tremendous amount of crude oil, and that's only one small example of an organization that lost a lot of trust because of that. So we now are looking at different ways to, you know, how do we change the way that we work? How do we change the perception of how we work? And how do we change? And that change has to come really from within the organization. And it's talking about and looking at how do we manage the organization and how do we deal with leadership within the organization. So flatter structures, more distributed leadership. You know, we're coming from an era where it was extraordinarily hierarchical. There was a president and a CEO, and there was a CFO and the CTO and the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, and then that is a cadre of leadership. They made the strategic decisions, and once those decisions were made, then they talked to their management layer, and that management layer then trickled down the information till it finally got down to the people doing the work. And when the people were doing the work and they had to ask questions, well, they asked their managers who asked other managers who asked people to help them get answers to the work. So a very hierarchical, very information restrictive environment. So these flatter organizations now are becoming more the model that many companies and many groups are trying to get into. And it encourages people to be more inclusive. It encourages more participation in decision making. It promotes diversity and collaboration and cooperation. And one really good example of this is an article that I read recently about Elon Musk and his organizations. He insists that people are able to send an email and talk to anybody in the organization that they need to get the job done. He will not accept the excuse that, well, I couldn't get hold of that person. I had to talk to their manager first. If you need to talk to somebody to get an answer, you are free to pick up the phone, email them, text them, IM them, whatever. And that is insisted from the top down. And that changes the way information flows within an organization, and that decentralizes the power structure. So it's not that a developer now has to go to their manager, who would then go to another manager, who would then go to another developer to get an answer, and then back through that chain to get the response back to the person that actually asked the question. That's all going away. And these flatter organizations are really, really promoting that. So how do we get people to work in these organizations? How do we get engaged people? How do we, well, first of all, what is engagement in this century? We're seeing the advent, or we've seen the advent of agile business processes, agile project processes, where we get very, very rapid cycle times. There's a really, really competitive talent market. It's getting harder and harder to hire people that bring in the skill sets that we need within organizations to continue the development, to continue this push forward. The organization that I work with a lot in my sort of daytime job, we've had open positions in our technology department for well over a year as a combination of required expertise, security clearances, and the high cost of living where I'm actually located. So it's very hard to attract people in. So we talk about engagement, and when you get people, the last thing you want to do is lose them. So how do we keep people engaged, and how do we keep them focused on wanting to stay at the organization and make the best of it? So we look at a survey that Harvard did of about 550 executives. 70% of those executives surveyed ranked engagement as being very important. And I'll repeat that, very important in achieving organizational success. And recognizing the high performers in an organization really had a significant effect on employee engagement. The flip side of that, though, is only 24% of the people that responded felt that their employees were highly engaged. So let's flip the script on that. Greater than 75% of the people in organizations that were responded to in this had employees that were not highly engaged. And that's a terrifying figure. You've got people working in an organization who are, yeah, doing the job, but they're not really passionate about it. They're not really giving everything that they've got. A lot of them are just going through the motions. So how do we measure this? Well, you measure it with surveys. Now with the standard, I've been in business too many years to mention, and I've done more than my share of employee satisfaction surveys where the same questions are totted out year after year after year. And then each year they're summarized, and we look at, as a management team, you look at the areas of improvement, the areas of challenge, what changed from the year before, what's changed from 2 years ago, how are we progressing on making this all better. But we're asking the same questions. Now, think about that. We're asking the same questions in an environment which is chaotic and changing constantly. So now organizations are starting to recognize that, and they're trying to push for higher levels of engagement. Then the surveys that they're starting to ask are asking much more pointed questions. And those questions are appropriate for the time and the environment that the organization is currently working in. So and the response they get to those questions are then, as organizations, they're spending a lot of effort looking at the responses, looking for deeper meaning, and also looking at how they can respond in a way that promotes engagement within the organization. So it's not looking, for past trends in history. That's still part of it, of course, but it's being much more focused on where we are today and where we need to get to tomorrow, because where we are today may not be where we thought we were going to be 5 years ago. Things have changed. So now it's about being very critical and very focused on what you're asking your employees and staff for. So Kelly, if you could go ahead and run the first of these class polls, please, and looking at whether your organization runs surveys and when they run surveys.
All right, Brian. Okay, these numbers keep changing, so it might not be exact, but we're at about 40% every year, about 22% every 2 years, and about 30 to 35% never.
Wow. Okay. Well, those are certainly interesting numbers. And I'm assuming the numbers are staying more or less in those ranges, Kelly?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
it's not
Okay.
exact. They keep changing, so.
Yeah, but it's close enough. All right. Well, that's very telling on how organizations from the people that are on this webinar are dealing with this. 40% have a survey every year. Well, that's interesting. What's I find more fascinating is that roughly a third of people never have employee surveys. So it's for those organizations, from people working in those organizations, how do they know what the organization is feeling? How do you take the pulse of the organization? And this is a challenge, and this is what contemporary leadership really needs to be focused on, is understanding what the pulse of the organization actually is. What is the feeling in the organization? What is critical to the organization? And how does the organization as a whole address this? It's no longer just up to management to address issues. It's up to the organization as a whole then to bring people in from the greater organization to figure out where we have to change and what changes have to be made and why those changes are going to be beneficial for everybody. And that's really a very key point. What is the benefit of change to people? And we'll talk more about change as we go through this. So highly engaged employees do what they feel is required by the organization. So in other words, the people that are highly engaged have a clear understanding of what the organization is trying to do. They understand the needs, they understand the goals. So they do what they have to do, right? They work the extra hours. They help out in the organization, empty the staff dishwasher, pick up a piece of garbage if they see it. Silly little things like that show and indicate that people are engaged in more than just sort of walking as a zombie through their workday. Highly engaged employees have discretionary energy, right? They want to do what they're doing. They feel good about what they're doing. They're energized. They look forward to going to work on Monday morning, and Not that they don't look forward to their weekend, but they don't have a problem working through Friday afternoon and then taking a couple of days off to recharge, right? But they'll put in their time. They'll put in the extra time if it's needed. And these people are hugely valuable, but each organizations on average only have about 24% of them, according to the Harvard survey. So you've got 24, 25, roughly a quarter of your workforce is doing all the things that you want the rest of your staff to be doing too. So that's one of the big challenges of contemporary leadership. So we tap into, and this is where we start talking about transformational leaders. If you're working in an organization that is moving more into this model of a flattened organization, more engaged, and you're trying to move the organization into a more engaged model and get people more highly engaged, we start to tap into that discretionary energy. And by doing that, we have to make sure that employees know what is expected of them. We cannot assume that our staff and our employees know what we want them to do. Right? We have to enter into dialogue. We have to enter into discussions with them. They have to understand the needs and goals of the organization. We ask the questions: who, what, where, when, and how. So who are our customers? Who are we working for? How are we working within the organization and within the environment that we're working in, within the community? Where are we working? Are we working just locally? Are we working on a global, a regional scale, a national scale? What is the priority that we have to meet? What are we trying to achieve in both in the short term and in the medium term and the longer term? And how is what I'm doing, how does that directly relate to all of these questions? I need to be able to create a link as a leader between the answer to these questions and every person who's working in the organization. Every single person must know how they fit to those 5 questions. And that creates that discretion. First of all, it creates engagement, and it also helps build discretionary energy as well. So we talked about this, or I mentioned this earlier. So we've got organizations, and the slide says we'll soon have 5 generations of workers on your staff. I would arguably say that most organizations have 5 generations of workers on staff right now. And that's not likely to change. As one generation drops off and finally retires out of business, the traditionalist generation, well, the next generation after Gen Z is going to start stepping in. So we're now dealing with people who are running a vast range of experience and a vast range of life experience. I mean, the world in 1945 compared to the world in 2017 is vastly different. It's our understanding of how we work and our understanding of people, and understanding of dynamics, our understanding of how management works and how leadership works has changed and developed so much in the last 15 to 20 years. So, and that's all born from the traditionalist and baby boomer generations. And then we get into the Gen X's and the millennials and the Gen Z's, and they have different needs and different desires, and they want more and more and more. So how do we deal with that? How do we build engagement across these multi-generational workforces? So we build sustainable organizations. So this concept of BASO, building a sustainable organization. We do this by having highly engaged employees, right? We reimagine an organization. We reimagine it to say, what do we need to do to be sustainable? And sustainability in this case is both sustainability of the organization, because people need jobs, but sustainability in terms of how the organization works, what resources the organization uses, and the resources being both the physical and talent resources from staff, because the staff resources are really are the big things. We need to show what people are accomplishing and why is that meaningful. How do we set appreciation? How do we show appreciation to employees in this day and age? Appreciation to a traditionalist or a baby boomer is very different than appreciation shown to a Gen Z or a millennial. How do you build this sense of team identity with people? Team identity from the perspective of I've got people working in 5 generations on the same team. You've got the mentors, perhaps, the mentors and the people who are in the older generations from the traditionalists and baby boomers, who are bringing a lot of knowledge and a lot of background and a lot of history. But then you've got the millennials, you've got the Gen Ys, millennials, and Gen Zs, who are bringing in this passion and this love, absolute love of technology. And how do you balance all of that together? And how do you build that team identity? And how do you build an environment where all of these people enjoy coming to work every day? Because the things that excite a traditionalist might not be the same things that excite a Gen Z. Right? So you have to build that sort of multi-faceted workplace as well, and also help people continue to grow their knowledge and careers. And remember, just because you may have an organization which has a good core of baby boomers who are still viable and still working hard in the workplace, I count myself as a boomer. I still want the ability to grow my knowledge as well, and I still want the ability to grow my career. So they're not to be left behind, because they also bring that background knowledge. But then you've got the more immediate needs of the younger generations who want to grow their knowledge and careers much quicker. They don't want to wait 5, 6, 7 years to get a promotion. They don't see the need of waiting that long to get a promotion, because they feel that they can do things better, faster, because they've got this access to technology and whatever. And hey, if we're honest with ourselves, we all felt that way when we started out working when we were younger, regardless of what generation we're in. So we build this passion for excellence, right? And successful organizations, and there's not one successful organization out there that doesn't have leaders who inspire excellence in others, right? You think about the Virgin Group of companies and Richard Branson, right? You think about Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX, right? These are people who are passionate, not afraid of taking the big risks, right? They think big. They think they think beyond the possibility, beyond what we think is even possible. A year ago or a year and a bit ago, the whole concept of the Hyperloop, was a doodle by Elon Musk on something that would be a really great way to perhaps start changing rapid transit. And it was just, yeah, it's a doodle. It's more of a thought experiment. Well, they're testing this now, and they're starting to talk about putting, maybe the first hyperlink might be between Toronto and Montreal in Canada. It might be an ideal place to put it. So, from thought to reality is becoming so much quicker, but they're leaders who are inspiring this excellence and inspiring people to take on those challenges. Right? They have visions that inspire excellence. Organizations create this transparent culture where they encourage feedback, where you're not afraid to talk to the CEO. You're not afraid to talk to the senior executives about how you feel about what the company is doing, right? And the inspired leader and is the person who will take that question, however naive it may be or however valid it may be, and have an open and honest discussion with that person, right? As an agent, but potentially because they themselves are learning something from it, but also as an opportunity to coach people to think beyond where their narrow question might have been. So the question might be something about, why are we spending so much money doing X and we're not spending money doing Y? Well, the answer might be very multifaceted, but it might be that the business requirements or the customer requirements are they want X, they don't want Y right now. We've parked Y, we're still spending some money on it, but here's the financial reasons, here's the business reasons, here's the strategy, here's what our customers think, here's the research that we've done, what do you think about this? And you start engaging people, and you start leading them, and you start inspiring them to think and to ask bigger questions, and you lead by example. So now, where does all of this take us? So now we're into technology and the impact of technology on trust. We see this dependence on technology growing and growing and growing. And we live in a world where communication is changing, and how we communicate and how we interact changes and is changing. It started off, I won't say it started off with Facebook, but certainly Facebook has been a huge influencer of relationships. Facebook, where we have 100 friends on Facebook, but how many people do you actually know? How many people do you actually see face to face as friends? How many times is a text sent from your team or from anybody in your household? They said the research in 2015 from Pew Research, the typical teen sends and receives 30 texts a day. And I would say that that's probably low. It seems to be increasing. 92% of teens are online every day, and fully a quarter of them report that they're online essentially constantly. So they're always online. So they're always connected to this great massive web of information, but they're connected electronically and they're not connected face to face. So when we're starting to look at building businesses towards a sustainable future, how do we manage that impact and that dependency on technology? So how do we build this bridge between people staring at their screens and people having an understanding about what's happening in the wider world? Relationships between people are changing, but humans are still humans, and people are social by nature. Now the challenge is, and we've probably all seen this, is with younger generations who are glued to their devices, and they'll go out together. So they'll socialize as a group of humans, but they'll go to a restaurant and they'll all have their devices out, and they'll be taking pictures and Snapchatting and Instagramming and texting and IMing and what have you, but they'll be doing it even amongst themselves at the same table, instead of actually talking to people, putting the phones down. So, trust is something that you have to build by face-to-face interaction. You don't build it by technological interaction, because you can hide behind the technology. And I won't go more into that, because we've all seen the implications of that in the news every single day. So I won't start ranting on that. But what I would like to know is, from the people that are on the webinar today, is how many work-related texts or text messages or instant messages do you send every day? It's interesting when we have systems at work. Of course, we use Link and we use Skype for IM platforms where I work in my other life, and it's amazing that there's a very few number of people who actually use it regularly. Most people will pick up the phone and call, or they will get up from their desk and they will walk over. Now, I work in a slightly different environment with I'll call it a slightly older workforce that are still text and still use technology very well, and I still text as well, but I don't use it. I would rather talk to somebody face to face. I'll get up and walk down the hallway to see somebody rather than wait for them to send me a text or answer something. So Kelly, how are we doing with the numbers?
All right, we're at about 58% less than 10, about 24% between 10 and 20, and about 18% over 20.
Okay, so the majority of people are still using texts and IMs, but not a huge amount. But there's still, again, still a significant number using between 10 and 20 and over 20. So that's fully 30-40% of the people, 40% of the people on the call. So it's a way of communicating. It's a way of sharing, of getting information out there very quickly. Excuse me. So what is the implications of texting? What is the implication of sending a lot of instant messages? Is there the potential for confusion? Is there the potential for misinformation? Or is it just a quick way to say, I can't be bothered to talk to you. Here's a quick answer to your question. Excellent. Whatever happened to just talking to people? And that's, that is the challenge, is creating, and the organizations are facing that challenge, is how to create opportunities for people to interact in a personal way. When we talk about trust and the communication behavior, particularly the younger generations, we're seeing a decrease in close friendships. So this is almost the opposite of what we have to do within an organization, where you're creating strong working relationships, which are essentially, for lack of a better word, they're work friendships. And we need to create that social awareness, and that social awareness also creates empathy. When people interact socially, they build empathy, and that empathy also builds an understanding within the organization about how I can support somebody else and how my work supports parts of the organization and how my work supports others within the organization. So it also helps create connections outside of the workforce. So outside of the workplace, sorry. You've got people who are engaged at work, but then they might find that they've got common interests and become engaged outside of the workplace in the community and in the greater environment that they live and work in. And that starts to build the bridges between the organization and the environment that the organization is working in. And this goes back to, again, building a sustainable organization, because a sustainable organization sustains both internally and externally to the organization, and externally not just to the customers, but externally to the environment that the organization is actually working in, the community that they're working in, the support structures within that community that support the workers in the organization, etc. All of this becomes a very interconnected web. And by organizations that are flatter, organizations that build social awareness and encourage empathy and encourage involvement in the outside community, really these organizations are very successful, and they're creating great brand awareness as well. This isn't just good for the environment. It's not just good for the company's bottom line. Well, it is good for the company's bottom line, because you're building brand awareness and you're building that engagement with your organization, your products, that you care. We're also facing, of course, this complexity, which we've been talking about a little bit all through this webinar. Technology is constantly changing. That's such an oxymoron now. It goes without saying. You know, if we don't see a new iPhone every year, it's like, what's going on? What's not changing? If we don't see new technology coming into play, if we don't see new server environments, if we don't see new security environments, globalization is, regardless of current situations, it is blurring borders. There are no borders when it comes to business anymore. I work with a lot of large multinational organizations, and work gets done in Eastern Europe that is transported to the southern US, who then support customers all over North America and the rest of the world. And this is common. There's nothing strange about all of this. But what does start to change is looking at the legal and regulatory compliance requirements and issues around these blurred borders, and around this whole complexity issue of organizations. How do you generate tax revenue when somebody is buying something overseas and they're buying something digital overseas and it's delivered digitally? Is it viable for a country to tax that purchase? Where if they bought that purchase, if they purchased that inside the country and went to a store to buy a piece of technology or a piece of software, they would pay tax on that software. But if I'm buying that software online, I'm not paying tax on it. So how do organizations and governments and societies deal with this from a legal and regulatory perspective? And our structures need to be able to evolve around this complexity. So this means that we need to harness change. Change is a really good thing. In this type of environment, if you're not changing, you're probably dying as an organization. You can't keep making buggy whips when Tesla's building new electric cars. Sorry, I'm talking a lot about Tesla. We have a Tesla dealership near where I live. I keep seeing them. I can't afford to buy one. Contemporary leaders find ways to get people committed to change, right? But it comes back to the authentic leadership. Authentic leaders understand what drives their employees. They understand what motivates them, and what engages them. And so they've built a highly engaged workforce. They demonstrate trust and respect and empowerment. All of this comes with building that highly engaged workforce. And employees have this sense of meaning and purpose. So they've built a purpose-driven organization led by vision. So now we start to harness this power of change. So how do we create profound change in an organization? So one way of looking at this is we use pilot groups. Right? Look for innovative ideas to change structures, look for infrastructure, look at different theories. Start small, grow steadily. Don't plan the entire change from beginning to end, because during the change will happen as well. So you're dealing with change in the midst of change. Things will not go perfectly according to plan, but that's fine. This challenge requires understanding, and it requires strategies which are often counterintuitive. To do something, you may have to undo something else, which you thought was really great, but is actually not supporting where the organization is going in the future. So in order to do all of this, of course, the key stakeholders have to be engaged and brought on board early on. There's no sense in leaving the C-suite out of the picture. There's no sense in leaving the key stakeholders, key project sponsors, etc., out of this situation of change. They have to be highly engaged in all of this. And when you're leading through transition, and this graph is very telling. I won't go through all of this. I'll just pick up some highlights. Performance changes. At the beginning of change, performance will decrease. And then performance will start to increase, and it'll start to plateau out over the short time. But then there's a very typical and very usual backsliding back to the way things used to be. So performance will tend to drop off slowly. But this is where you need, as a leader, to understand conflict, understand emotion, help individuals get through the ideas of change, promote the change, encourage people to create goals, encourage risk-taking, right? Encourage people to see beyond their individual challenges and their inertia to go back to the way things always were. Promote people to actually change. And over time, performance will increase. And this is really key, because leadership and change requires a commitment to time. So now we've got a juxtaposition happening, because we've got the idea that organizations need to change, but they don't have time to change because the change in and of itself takes too long. So now we need to shorten up this graph, if you will, so that performance and time, the same curves will apply, but in terms of actual time, it will be shortened. It's not going to take a year or 2 years. We're talking about going through these types of transitions every 6, 12, 18 months in some organizations. So there's a constant working with staff. And if you can imagine going through these types of transitions with organizations even every 12 to 18 months, how people will get used to doing this. They'll get used to change. They'll start looking for change. They'll start looking for ways to do things differently. And they'll start becoming more engaged through this whole process. So the process of change and the process of transition also helps to build more engaged employees. And it's all through leadership driving this, and leadership being open and transparent and encouraging, creating goals, coaching and mentoring people so that they are ready to take the challenge of change. As we are in this multi-generational workforce, we're also in a multicultural workforce, and our work is moving very, very virtual. I'm working from home today. It's as easy for me to work from home as it is for me to work from a Starbucks, as it is for me to work in the office. It doesn't really matter where I am, except on those few times when I have to have a face-to-face meeting. And I'm sure that's no different from anybody else on the webinar. Right? We also purposely set up virtual teams, and we purposely set up an environment where we collaborate across large time zones. We collaborate across regions, across country, and we do have a reliance on technology for this. But we also have to couple that, again, going backwards a little bit, couple that with building the social interaction in any way that we can to support that team building in a virtual environment as well. So management needs to have a very flexible approach to delivery. It needs to have a flexible approach to how work gets done and when work gets done. The when really is driven by the customer. So, I mean, your team has to be aware of that, and people have to be aware of that, of course. But do people work better in the afternoons? Do they have to be there in the morning? Do they have to be there core hours? Or do you have people that work better if they start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and work through till midnight? There's a lot of challenges in dealing with this flexible approach, but each organization will approach it differently. And it depends on the structure and the nature of your organization, how much flexibility can be allowed, and what sort of rules you have to put in place to encourage this. So organizational hierarchies are becoming less and less effective. Younger workers want more place in the decision making, and we need to adapt to that. Young people and younger generations have been exposed and living with constant technological, change and challenge their whole life. Older people like me who have seen technology grow through their lifetimes, change isn't as it's just not dealt with in the same way. Information is reality. Young people, that sounds like a terrible way to put that. Younger generations bring a lot to the table, and they bring a lot of passion, they bring a lot of enthusiasm. And it's important, and it's critical as leaders and as managers, and particularly as leaders in organizations, to embrace that passion and engage with that passion in the organization, and work with the younger generations to build on that passion, to find different and better ways of doing things. So being more inclusive, getting to know your people is really, really important in all of this. Getting to know what drives them, what is important to all your generations of workers in your environments. So we're building these sustainable organizations. We're looking for ideas and perspectives. We're looking for highly engaged employees that they exceed expectations. And exceeding expectations is fine when we set expectations, but they also exceed expectations in uncertain environments. And they do this by knowing that the organization has a strong vision. They know what is valued by the organization, what is defined as good by the organization. They have a clear understanding of where the organization is trying to go and what they're trying to accomplish. So imagine that everybody has as clear a picture of the direction of the organization as the president and CEO of the organization. From all levels of the organization, everybody would be able to answer the question in a similar way. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? To build that level of engagement is fascinating to see when it happens right. Everybody faces and embraces the passion within the organization. So the command and control structure, it's becoming obsolete, right? New leaders are flexible, and it's more about role-based management rather than functional-based management. So the roles that managers play, the roles that leaders play, is more around communication, it's more around embracing change, it's more around enabling the workforce to actually succeed and take true ownership of the work that they're doing. So leaders embrace this empowerment, and they want employees who are engaged. They want employees who challenge the leader's view of the world. And not challenge in a negative way, but ask questions. Challenge the decisions that are being made. We cultivate curiosity. Why do things work the way they do? Why are we doing things? Why do we do it this way? And there's a constant questions of why. Embracing this social networks, embracing business networks. Leaders look for ways to tap into new ways of working and tap into the experiences of other people, not just within their organizations, but within the greater environment of business organizations and business networks. I belong to LinkedIn, and I'm sure most of the rest of you do as well. I spend maybe 10 to 20 minutes a day on LinkedIn, going through and browsing through the different posts and the different articles that are coming up. And maybe 3 or 4 times a week, I find something that really tweaks my interest. And because of that, it helps drive me down to learn more about that topic. Now, sometimes it's a waste of time, sometimes it's not. But I do find that using those networks and using that information that's available, things that I wouldn't maybe have thought about myself, or probably wouldn't have thought about myself, but somebody else has thought about that they're in my network. People bring a lot to the table. If you spend time getting to know people, both inside and outside your work, you will learn more, and you will be able to learn how to look at complex issues and how to leverage the diverse perspectives of people within your organization and within your networks as well. We're trying to create a focus on innovation and improvement. That's key to success now, and making sure that we're serving this greater environment that we're working in. So there's a prime directive. People will work to the best of their abilities. People use the necessary resources. People work with the knowledge they have available. People take ownership. People share success stories. Change is a good thing. And everybody understands the link between their work, the customers, the organization, and the community. And I would urge you to refer back to this, print it out, and stick it up on your wall so that people can see it and that you are reminded of what the prime directive for sustainable organizations is. So, to summarize this, the 21st century requires an enhanced management toolkit. We build on this multi-generational nature of organizations, and we know that change is not only inevitable, it is a critical, necessary building block for organizations to be sustainable now and moving into the future. And with that, I will leave you and say thank you, and I hope to see you again soon, or talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate you joining us. And if anyone has any questions, we will stay on the line for the next few minutes. Feel free to type those questions in, and we will get those to Brian to answer over audio. While we're waiting for those, just want to point you guys to our website. We do have our contemporary leadership classes scheduled for both November and January. So this is a 2-day course for anyone working within leadership or aspiring to transition into leadership who would like to professionalize their skills and competencies. So if you guys would like to check out our website at newhorizons.com, you can click on the courses and certifications, and there you will see our Center for Leadership and Development offerings. So please visit newhorizons.com. You can also contact your local New Horizons, reach out to your local New Horizons account executive. If you don't know who that is or how to reach them, visit our website, newhorizons.com, and you can do a zip code search to find your nearest center. Also want to let you guys know that we do have a series of upcoming webinars already scheduled. Again, you can visit our website, newhorizons.com. Just click on the webinars link there. Lots of information including our upcoming schedule and registration links, as well as a link to view over 40 past webinar recordings. And these are all free for you guys to review, learn any of the latest tips and tricks regarding our available course offerings. So please take advantage of that. And let's see if we have any questions here. Hold on one second. Oh, okay, just a lot of positive feedback, Brian. So trying to read through all of these, but many people are just saying that it was a great presentation, and thank you. So if you guys have any questions, we'll stay on the line for the next few minutes. Want to thank you all again for taking the time to join us today, and I hope you'll reach out to your local New Horizons as well for all of your training needs. And I think that will do it. So thanks again, Brian. Really appreciate you joining us today.
My absolute pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. That'll conclude today's session. I will follow up later today with an email including the link to view the session recording. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.